couple of weeks ago when I was out of town with my brother when we did those few videos. We were out somewhere and I just randomly decided to purchase this copy of Terminal Velocity because I hadn't seen it since I owned the VHS of it. And it was always kind of one of those guilty pleasure things. So on the way back, I sort of jokingly said, now that I had a real copy of Terminal Velocity, that I could do this versus. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, maybe it's not so much of a joke. Maybe I can just go ahead and do it. Why not? I don't know how many people these days still remember that these movies exist. But not only are they both cases of like just sort of showing what you can accomplish when you were an action movie in the first part of the 90s and you could pretty much just do whatever the hell you wanted without worrying about if, say, small things like your plot totally doesn't make sense, or is too jumbled for its own good, or whatever. But you just run with it anyway because it was more about the spectacle. But this is also one of the lesser-known cases of the two types of movies that were competing because they were pretty much the same kind of movie coming out in the same year. So they were pretty much racing to see who would get to theaters first. And I believe it was Terminal Velocity made it to September, so Drop Zone held back and came out in early December. And naturally, both of them bombed, pretty much. I think it was Terminal Velocity made like $16 million on a $50 million budget, and Drop Zone made like $29 million on a $45 million budget. So apparently it didn't really matter who got there first. Though it sounds like Drop Zone had the lesser budget and made just a bit more. Which is interesting given that it came second. And that they weren't very far apart in release. So I don't know what that says about Terminal Velocity or how people were feeling about this kind of thing back then. Especially since, well, it's kind of hard to say because they both have a different approach to how they use the skydiving action scene to their advantage. Because obviously both of them, that's what basically their whole identities are, is the way they utilize the skydiving in their action scenes. Everything else that happens in either one of these movies might as well not even matter. But we'll go one movie at a time like we usually do, and start with Terminal Velocity, which there were some critics out there that took to it. Like, there's a couple of comments here on the back, but for the most part, it was pretty widely not beloved, I guess we'll say. What you would probably come to expect in a 90s action movie starring Charlie Sheen, with a weird plot. Because this whole introduction really only works to confuse you, where it's almost like, I mean, we're immediately promised, you know, this cheesy 90s action movie, but the way it starts almost feels like a horror movie. Where this woman is being pursued by these people that may or may not be Russian or working for Russians or something like that. And it's like dark and there's like jump scares, one of which being I think it's a trash bag hitting her car as she's driving away. She's almost hit by a plane. She's almost hit by a plane like it's a car, as it's landing, because she's right here and it just goes right over like Wayne's World style. And then she's eventually pursued back to her house where she is ultimately killed. And that's when we're introduced to some of our villains. So it's like this little prologue that kind of takes us into the action a little bit. Though it's one of those movies where some of the action gets so spectacular, and there's such a decent opening here with Sheen's character that I don't know that you need that sort of we gotta hook the audience as soon as possible opening, especially one done as kinda poorly as this one is. So we do have this opening sequence where we see Charlie Sheen skydiving, where his job is that he's an instructor, but he also is always pulling shit like this, where he comes down and then he's got like what turns out to be fake assless pants, because he thinks he's going to a bachelorette party, but he's actually going to the birthday party of an 8-year-old named Bernadette. I'm guessing Bernadette and Bachelorette's where he got them mixed up. Uh, so, a pretty funny gag to start the movie off with, especially since we do get this spectacular skydiving sequence, even if that's the punchline of it. Because that is the one thing you have to get used to, is it's kind of weird how much Terminal Velocity, I think, in its heart, wants to be a comedy. Despite the whole Russians espionage plot and the spectacular action sequences. But yeah, and he's also known for being really reckless. He's gotten, like, what, 12 safety violations in a month or something. He's reminded of an episode he had where he jumped down into a professional football game and grabbed the ball and tried to make a run for it. So just overall, totally and completely reckless. So, obviously Charlie Sheen is not a bad casting choice. And, you know, he's got charm that kind of works throughout the movie, even if, like I said, a lot of his little one-liners, or this movie trying awfully hard to almost go full comedy sometimes. But yeah, and it is also interesting to note that, one of the main people considered for this before Charlie Sheen took it was Tom Cruise, who just turned it down, to my understanding, which is really interesting when you think about all the promotion he was doing for Fallout, Mission Impossible Fallout, where he talked about doing, you know, the skydiving sequence like 100 times, and how it just became like second nature to him. And it's like, I wonder, just based on how he felt doing that, if this is a part that he would take today just for the pleasure of being able to do that multiple times for multiple scenes. Because I could see this being, you know, I could see Cruise having done this movie back then. I think it was the same year as Interview with the Vampire, so I don't know if that had anything to do with him turning it down or what, but, or maybe he just thought the script was shit or something. But, so going on that, yeah, so when we talk about this plot, because we do start off with the whole, like, Russians thing and all that, but there is this plot that sets us off, where Nastasia Kinski comes in and is his student, and she's insisting that they do this right now, and usually she'd have to wait till like the end of the week or something, or make an appointment. But because Sheen's character is always thinking with his dick throughout the entire movie, once again, very well cast, he goes ahead and decides he's going to take her. And what we see in this sort of, you would kind of immediately know that something's off about this, but supposedly, while his back is turned, she falls out of the plane and to her death. But there's obviously something fishy about this right away, especially since no particular faces are shown as this happens. But, to the movie's credit, it doesn't hide for very long that obviously that was not her, and was some random body that they got and threw off. And basically setting up for James Gandolfini to follow him around, who's an assistant DA, and threatening manslaughter charges should an investigation prove that. So now, because of this looming Gandolfini threat, he has no choice, when she shows back up, to do basically everything that she asks him to. Because she's the fact that she exists, the fact that she is still alive, is the only thing that's going to keep him from these manslaughter charges. And naturally he gets into it, and it gets a little... So, you hear that, and now I'm not saying that Terminal Velocity is on this level by any means, but it is interesting that in the plot that I just said, with the whole, you know, falling girl, and it's not actually her and all that, you've almost got some Vertigo vibes here. Almost. And with all the other stuff, like the espionage and stuff like that, yeah, there's almost something Hitchcocky in the plot. Like I said, I'm not saying it's in the movie at all, but the plot, like on paper, there are echoes of it. So that's interesting, especially in a movie like this. And yeah, so, and we do have an interesting cast. I mentioned Kinski, I mentioned Gandolfini. Our other villain, apart from Gandolfini, once he's, you know, predictably revealed to be one of them, is the more sort of hardcore villain, and like kind of really the main villain, because the whole Gandolfini's kind of barely in it for being the final showdown of the movie. But no, our threat throughout pretty much the whole movie is a blonde Christopher McDonald of all people. Um, and he's a lot of fun here, obviously, as he often is, especially in villain roles, especially getting to be as over the top as he does here. There's also the presence of his pilot. His pilot in the scene when he's taking her out, when she fakes him out, is genre pioneer Melvin Van Peebles. Who, yeah, obviously the Van Peebles family are also known for these sort of, just random action movies here and there. But it's still interesting to see Melvin in particular in a movie like this and in a role as small as it is. And he makes enough of an impression, especially when he's talking to Sheen about what he's going to say if he happens to be questioned. I would have kind of liked to have seen more of that character, but I think after that he just kind of disappears from the movie, which is unfortunate. But, so yeah, there's definitely something strong in the cast here. So we've got that on top of the action scenes, and the thing that I do love about the action scenes here is that this is kind of the way they use the skydiving, like I was talking about, is kind of where it differs from Drop Zone, where they differentiate from each other. Because while Drop Zone kind of gets as creative as it can with all the different ways they do it, Terminal Velocity's skydiving scenes are much more akin to, say, Point Break, and how they serve as, action scenes and the way they're shot. They do look very similar, but that doesn't make them any less thrilling. If anything, that's a compliment that they're Point Break-esque in the way that they are. With that said, the action that's not a skydiving scene is, garden variety early action movie starring Charlie Sheen. The rocket car thing in particular is kind of dumb, and another case of the movie almost trying to go full comedy for some reason. I still have no idea why they were trying to walk that line so much. They weren't even walking it, they kept tripping over it. But it's there, and then ultimately it leads to an explosion that kind of reenacts that famous shot from Die Hard 2 of him ejecting himself as it explodes behind him. Pretty sure that shot's taken directly. So, you could say it's Point Break-esque. That shot was straight out of Die Hard 2. They just stole it. Shamelessly. So, when you go into this also, there are things that kind of don't necessarily work, that do work in Drop Zone's favor. Like, for instance, in Drop Zone, there's really not a lot of them trying to do the love story thing. Obviously, Snipes does have a female character that's his partner in this, more or less. But they don't really go that route that I remember. And here, this is Terminal Velocity trying to do something else. It's trying to do the whole espionage plot. It's trying to do the big action skydiving stuff. It's, for some reason, trying to be a comedy. And, oddly enough, the whole romance angle takes over quite a bit as well. Almost like it's trying to be another entire genre in it and not just a side thing. And to the movie's credit, the pacing is, really, really well done. Unbelievably well done. Because the action feels non-stop. But at the same time, it does know when to take its breathers. And the breathers last for just the right amount of time before another big action scene takes off. But the thing about it, though, is what you're putting in these breather spaces. Because, like I said, the timing is fine. The timing couldn't be better. But what you're filling that time with is them basically bickering back and forth. And there's really nothing charming about it. There's, no chemistry here whatsoever. And like I said, Kinski thinks she's in an espionage movie. Sheen thinks he's in a comedy. Both are in an action movie. Nobody seems to know what's going on here. And then there's the whole thing where throughout the entire movie, Sheen's character is, say it with me, well cast. Weirdly perverse. Through the whole movie. There's the whole thing where, obviously, once again, the whole plot happens because he's thinking with his dick. which, you know, to her credit, is she knows just what would happen, so... But the thing here also is, like, when he, like, has her try to sit between his legs when they're flying up. And she's like, you know, oh, you're just a walking penis. And he says, no, I'm a flying penis. Direct dialogue. I honestly don't know if I like that line or not. Because for some reason, I almost kind of do. I guess because the audacity that it's actually there. But anyway, but yeah, that's kind of throughout it. And then it kind of goes over to her also. There's the moment when they're drinking together. And he talks about how she swallowed the worm. And her response is, I was trained to swallow all sorts of things. Wink, wink. And that just seems to kind of come from it. And it's just really, like I said, it just gives this movie this really weirdly perverse vibe that doesn't fit. And it's like a PG-13 movie, too. So it's like, I don't know if they were trying to once again walk a line here, and be edgy or something. I don't know. In '94, it's hard to tell. And there are lines, though, where sometimes they are, you know, genuinely funny. Like I said, even if the movie doesn't really fit. Like, when they get on the plane and they find all the bodies, and of course, this is something that Sheen is not used to. So his actual line is, oh my god, those are genuine dead people. And he just, the fact that he can't believe that he's actually basically in a story like this. It's almost like somebody was in another movie and they were dropped into this one and they can't believe it. It's what you literally feel like you're watching. So there is maybe something interesting there, even if it seems totally out of place and tonally completely off balance, but, yeah, so, but you talk about the action scenes, and the plot, and as it goes, and yeah, it does get significantly dumber as it goes. Like, it does start off with a decent plot, and the way they handle it and the way they reveal certain stuff, and when they reveal those things, works for a while, but then, yeah, it just, I think the rocket car is what starts it. And then it just gets dumber as it goes. But that's not to say that they don't redeem themselves, because because I remembered, when I watched it again, I remembered this being better. Like, I know I said guilty pleasure and everything, but I did feel like there, in a way, when I saw it back in the day, that there was something still genuinely good about it. And then you're reminded of why I think that is, in this final action scene, one of the final action scenes, the penultimate action scene, I guess you could say, the final fight with Christopher McDonald, which is not just a final fight. They are in a car that is in a plane, because you go to movies currently like Furious 7, where all of the cars parachuted out of the back of the plane, and it was awesome. But here, in 1994, we have no support in this car, and we have Kinski in the trunk, Sheen's in the driver's seat, and it has fallen out of the plane, and Christopher McDonald is gripped to the front of it. He's laying across the hood, and he's got a grip on the windshield, and he is shooting at Sheen, and Sheen has to take care of Christopher McDonald, get Kinski out of the trunk, and then parachute them to safety before the car hits the ground. That is a fucking spectacular action scene. Now, mind you, of course, it does take this car fucking forever to hit the ground so that all this can happen. But I mean, still, it's undeniably a great, great action scene. And the fact that the movie kind of ends on that high, I think, sort of gives it maybe a better reputation than it might have. It makes you forget all the dumb shit. And then that's followed up one more week, punctuate it with this final scene with Gandolfini, this showdown. With Gandolfini, this character that's only barely come in and out of it, but apparently is very crucial. Yeah, and then this is great also. I do think it would be interesting if the movie had the balls to actually kill Kinski, because when Gandolfini comes down from out of nowhere, literally drops out of the sky and stabs her in the back, for a brief moment you think he's actually killed her. And it's like with all the build-up, and then, you know, later it, you know, could be this sort of tragic thing where he finds out, oh, she actually was telling the truth all the time. Because there's the whole, you know, conflict in the middle where she's trying to be real with him and he thinks, after everything else has happened, that she's just completely bullshitting at this point about her three-legged dog and everything. But they really, really, really wanted to actually bring the three-legged dog into this. The three-legged dog gets his own freeze frame when we see him. And so... it's just that kind of movie. So, yeah, even though it is, you know, tonally everywhere, I would have kind of liked to have seen them have the balls to kill her off that way, because it just happens so suddenly, and they kind of make you believe it's actually happened. I think it's the shot of the bloody knife that we see by itself. Almost like it was really trying to ram it home, like, yeah, this is final. But it's not, of course. And then, of course, we get Gandolfini's nice death of being parachuted into one of those windmills. And so, yeah, and then the movie has to end on a laugh with the three-legged dog. Just to further say, fuck our toad. Just one final way of saying, we don't know what the hell this was, but we're just running with it from scene to scene. And sometimes we'll do something spectacular, and sometimes we're totally idiotic. And I think, honestly, when you look back on it, that's kind of the appeal of the movie. It's one of those cases where when you're watching it, you're like, wow, this is fucking dumb, but also kind of amazing, too. Then it's when you're looking back on it that you're like, you kind of really only remember the amazing stuff. So the movie kind of looks out in that regard, but also shows how much of an impact they make when they do something really great. So yeah, that's really... There's not really much else to elaborate on, or analyze, or whatever you want to say. That's just Terminal Velocity in a nutshell. So in a way, it's exactly what you expect. In other ways, maybe not, but maybe that's not for the better. But I mean, overall, once again, when you're kind of thinking about it in retrospect, it's like, I'm really glad movies like this exist, and I'll come back to it many times. So fuck it. So as far as Drop Zone goes, I think I saw Drop Zone first, back in the day. And I remember, like, it's another one like Terminal Velocity, where I remember really, really liking it a lot. And then when I saw it again, it was like, oh, I remember this being better. But I still kind of really like it anyway. And much like Terminal Velocity, it's a movie I'll probably end up coming back to many times, why not? I've already watched this DVD by itself maybe 3 times. So... Our director of Drop Zone is notable because he is John Badham, who has had a very interesting filmography. He has done everything from Saturday Night Fever to, War Games, to Short Circuit. And this was kind of in the middle there. No, this was after all those, actually. And then there's an interesting producer credit. One of the producers is DJ Caruso, who would go on to direct thrillers such as Disturbia and Eagle Eye and Taking Lives. A really underrated director in the thriller area. Is a producer on this, like, over a decade before he made any of those movies. So we've got some interesting credits going into it, and of course Snipes, who was kind of in his prime in these early 90s action movies. This would have been the year after Demolition Man, and now we get him back in hero mode, where this movie is kind of acting as, like, almost like a reverse Passenger 57, like, almost on purpose, it feels like. Whereas where he was trapped in the plane in that movie, he's just constantly jumping out of planes in this one. Still fighting terrorists, though. Only instead of Bruce Payne, now we've got Gary Busey. Just the ultimate... there wasn't a very... I guess stereotypical 90s bad guy that Wesley Snipes didn't fight, I don't think. But the interesting about Snipes being the star of this is that you would think it's totally and completely on purpose. I don't know if they changed some stuff in regards to this, but it seems very intentional that Wesley Snipes is the star of this because his character's name is Nessip. N-E-S-S-I-P. Which, of course, if you switch those letters up, it's Snipes. But the thing that's confusing about that, and makes me think they probably changed a few things here and there, is that apparently this movie was originally intended for Steven Seagal. But, man, what much of a shittier movie it would have been in that regard. You look at Steven Seagal, and then you've got the amazing charisma of early 90s Wesley Snipes. It's like, which one? Oh, yeah. And it does, apparently the only reason Seagal didn't do this was he was doing Under Siege 2. Which, interestingly enough, this movie kind of has, like, almost, I want to say almost echoes of some of Seagal's movies. That may be the fact that Busey's the villain, which of course he was one of the main villains in the first Under Siege, so that's probably just where my mind was going. So he had the option to either, he was going to be Under Siege either way. Steven Seagal was either going to fight Gary Busey again, or do Under Siege 2. He was always going to be coming back to Under Siege regardless. But no, we got Snipes, thank God, so we can move on. And when we start off, he and his partner, but also his actual brother, played by Malcolm Jamal Warner, are here to escort Michael Jeter. And of course, Michael Jeter, the late yet always amazing, is once again playing a prisoner who has seemingly a fondness for animals. This character's sort of much more of a bad guy in the traditional sense, of course. And he is in prison because he is a hacker, so Snipes and Malcolm Jamal Warner have to transport him, but while he's being transported, Gary Busey and his whole crew are on the plane, and they grab him up and skydive out of the plane, blow a hole in the side of it, kill Malcolm Jamal Warner in the process. So it becomes a revenge movie, but also a skydiving movie, but also a 90s hacker movie. And we know the 90s just really nailed the hacker thing. Of course they do. Hackers itself was only the year after this. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I actually I mean, it's obviously way over the top and really just pure, stupid 90s action movie. But I'm going to be totally honest with you, I kind of like Drop Zone's plot, as ridiculous as it. I think the fact that it's so outlandish is part of it. But it's also, like, in the confines of cheesy 90s action movie, it's as logical as it's going to get. You know what I mean? And where it's still totally over the top, because what we have here is the reason Gary Busey has snatched Michael Jeter the hacker and jumped out of this plane is because they are going to use Michael Jeter to skydive once again, of course, down onto, like, a federal building, and they're gonna go in there and they're gonna hack into everything and get all the names of all the undercover DEA agents and auction them off to the cartels. And, you know, once again, you know, him being a hacker, there's probably a way he can do this without them having to go through all this. He probably could have done that from prison, really. But that's the thing, is you just kind of run with it. But of course, this is going to take place when nobody will notice people skydiving onto federal buildings. So it's going to be during this whole skydiving, like, exhibition thing. That's in DC. So it's like, oh, because this is happening, the sky security in DC will be a little more lax, so we can do it. And of course, you have to get by the fact to think that the sky security in DC would ever be lax for any reason, let alone a skydiving exhibition, but okay. But yeah, okay, so that's the kind of thing that you just kind of totally run with, because you can tell. You can so tell that all of this is just an excuse to be skydiving porn. For most of this movie, that's all its purpose is. Especially in the middle, like from the middle on, it's just like non-stop, let's see how many different ways we can shoot a skydiving scene. And once again, much like Terminal Velocity, that's kind of what makes the movie so amazing, is that it barely gives a fuck how it gets to the spectacle, it just wants to get to the spectacle. And when it does that, yeah, it's this real, like I said, Terminal Velocity kind of felt more like they were just sort of channeling the Point Break scenes, which is great. But Drop Zone's like really trying to get creative. It kind of reminds me of whenever you watch like the Step Up movies, if you're doing that for some reason. And you can tell that everything around it doesn't matter. All they want to do is the really spectacular, overly elaborate dance sequences. That's exactly the style of Drop Zone. Just replace dancing with fucking skydiving. You've got, like, there's the scene towards the end when they're, like, all of them are, like, lit up, and there's, like, fireworks going off around them, which is seemingly dangerous as fuck, but it doesn't matter. As long as it looks cool, that's all the movie wants to do. That's the movie's objective, is if it looks cool, fuck the rest. And like I said, I kind of miss that nonchalant attitude sometimes. And that movies can't really do that anymore without being totally and completely ridiculed for being, like, having holes in logic and stuff like that. And it's like, that, I sound like a broken record, I'm sure, but I mean, once again, there are movies, of course, that depend on their logic, and if there are gaps in that, it's gonna make the movie look stupid. But when you got a movie like this, where it so clearly is not the idea behind it, it is not the reason the movie exists at all. This is, like, this might as well have just been a whole skydiving movie, like that's all the movie is. It just happens to have a plot they had to put in it, so they're like, alright, we'll do this whole hacker thing, because it's the early 90s, I guess. But that's not to say that there aren't some amazing things outside of that. The villains, in particular, are very threatening. These villains will kill anybody and anything. Like, it's kind of jarring how many innocent people just get shot like nothing in this movie by these villains. And the thing about that also is Gary Busey being our main villain. And as you can probably guess, Busey is eating the scenery fucking alive. The very first thing he does, for a reason I don't even recall, is the very beginning, when he grabs Michael Jeter to jump off the plane, before they jump off the plane with this guy that he needs to use his hands to hack into things, he bites one of his fingers off. Like I said, for a reason I don't even remember. It just happens. And then there's, like, the moment at the end when they're confronting each other, because there's two revenge plots kind of going on here simultaneously on top of everything else. You've got Snipes avenging Malcolm Jamal Warner, and you've got the girl, like, avenging her ex that was part of their team that Busey killed by throwing into power lines while they were parachuting, because it's that kind of movie. And when this girl tries to confront him, Busey's method is to grab her and just scream in her face, because he's that kind of villain. And it's kind of amazing. To actually see a movie like this where the villains feel like genuine threats because they'll just mow down anything, is really interesting and kind of really refreshing also, where they just don't seem to be holding back. And speaking of the movie not holding back either, there's also, like I was saying, the relationship between Snipes and Yancey Butler's character, where you would think there'd be, like, a love story brewing here. But in actuality, we have this first scene that I'd love to see in a movie today, just to see what would happen, when she sort of takes him on a test run by dropping him out of a plane without his parachute. Unknowingly, just dropping him. Dropping the floor out from under him, and he falls through the sky, and she goes down, and she catches him and parachutes them to safety. And what is Snipes' reaction to this? He decks her in the face and knocks her into the water. Now, the reason that I think it's okay that we can say this is amazing is the fact that apparently this character originally was supposed to be another guy. So the punching scene was in there. But when Yancey Butler was cast and the character was changed to a woman, it was her that insisted. They were gonna take it out, but she was like, oh no, he's gotta hit me. Like, he just has to. So she insisted on the punch remaining, regardless of the character's gender being changed. Which is really cool on her part, I think. So, as far as, like, the action scenes go, there is the whole thing of, yeah, we do have the great skydiving scenes, but there is something here that I kind of remember not really seeing in Terminal Velocity much anyway. And that is, while we do get these great skydiving scenes that are clearly in all their glory, we also get a lot of scenes that are clearly, like, right before the skydiving scenes. I guess by contrast, like by looking at this scene followed by the actual spectacle that is the skydiving scene, it's clear that they're on, like, a set that's got, like, a giant fan that's rocking back and forth. But yeah, in contrast, when we do actually see the whole thing, but like I said, when it cuts back, though, you can tell that there's, like, not all the action scenes are going to be spectacular when you have cuts like that, but still, once they're actually happening, and like I said, you get all that stuff, where they're getting as creative as possible, especially at the end of it during the exhibition stuff, then it's just kind of irresistible, especially when that's your thing. I talked about, when we did the Bond video, how my favorite Bond opening of all time is the skydiving scene in Moonraker. Even if the rest of the movie is like a total bore, like, if you ace a skydiving scene, you've got me eating out of the palm of your hand. So, obviously, I would take to these movies regardless of how they feel about plot, or their developments, or anything else like that. But having said that, I do think Drop Zone does more with what it has. Where, like I said, preposterous as it is, I kind of like its plot. And the way I should probably not be saying plot, I should probably be saying I like the method in which they shoehorn in skydiving. So, yeah, and they get more spectacular with it and all that, so, and they seem to be kind of having more fun with themselves. And it seems to have an established tone. Which is something you can't quite say about Terminal Velocity, so yeah, at another time I probably would have preferred Terminal Velocity, but these days I think I'd take Drop Zone, so, but both, like I said, are kind of these guilty pleasures that I'll keep coming back to anyway, so, yeah, so that's what we have here. I do have the next two verses planned. I already mentioned, for the weekend of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I'll probably be doing True Romance and Natural Born Killers. And then I've got a nice one lined up for the weekend of The Lion King as well, where we're going into, one's entirely animation, one is part animation. And one of them is an extremely, extremely beloved movie, and the movie up against it that I think I might prefer. We'll get to all that. The big ass review video is coming. I'm still building it as I'm making this one, but it's coming. 20 movies in one, so we're catching up. That should about catch us up. So, and then after that, we'll have The Lion King, then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, then we'll be done with this month, and I don't know what the hell is going to be happening then. So, until all that stuff, that's it.